Theologians, philosophers, and psychologists have long pondered the development of spirituality in humans. In the 1970s and 80s, theologian James Fowler proposed 7 stages of spiritual development, beginning in the newborn baby and continuing through life. These steps closely followed psychological growth stages proposed by researchers of the day. Since then, others have modified the model, and some have expanded it to include stages they suggest didn't exist or weren't recognized when Fowler was doing his work. Today, there are many models with different descriptions, but a general pattern exists. Some of these models are built around the chronological age of the individual, others around the stages themselves whenever they appear. Still others ascribe these steps to entire religions as practiced around the world. For simplicity's sake, I'll use a snapshot of Fowler's stages to explain, and I am grateful to Roseanne Koresh for her cogent summary of those stages. As I describe them, think of your own spiritual development and whether it followed anything like this progression. The first stage is the primal or undifferentiated stage, and this occurs from newborn to about 2 years of age. In this stage, a very small child learns to rely on the goodness or badness or inconsistency of the world based on how that child is treated by their parents. It's the foundational stage of trust versus mistrust. Next comes the intuitive projective stage from 3 to 7 years. In this stage, children are beginning to be able to use symbols and their imaginations. They're very self-focused and inclined to take very literally ideas about evil, the devil, or other negative aspects of religion. The ability to sort out reality from fantasy is not well developed. Some models call this the magic stage and describe it as that point when the individual holds the belief that they themselves can alter reality just by thinking about something or performing a few rituals. Next is the mythic literal stage, 6 to 12 years of age, school-age kids. During this stage, information is organized into stories. These stories, along with moral rules, are understood literally and correctly. There is little ability to step back from the story and see overarching meaning. Some people and religious groups remain in this stage throughout their lives. Next comes the synthetic conventional stage. This is adolescence to early childhood, and some people remain permanently in this stage. Here, people believe without having critically examined their beliefs. They believe what they have been taught and in what they see everyone else believing in. There is a strong sense of identity within the group. People in this stage are not very open to questions because questions are threatening at this point. They place a large amount of trust in external authority figures, and their beliefs are internalized but have not been examined. Some philosophers have suggested that 60 to 70% of the world's population is at this stage or lower in their spiritual development. Next is the individuative reflective or deconstructive stage. Now, the earlier this happens in adulthood, the easier it is in the person. In this stage, a person begins to recognize that they're in a box and look outside it. They ask questions and see the contradictions or problems in their beliefs. This can be a very painful stage, as old ideas get changed and sometimes rejected altogether. Some people give up on faith altogether at this point, but it can also be strengthened as beliefs become more explicitly, personally held. There is a strong reliance here on the logical, rational mind and the self. Following the deconstructive stage is the conjunctive stage, which is usually not before midlife. In this stage, a person has gone through the deconstruction of the previous stage and begins to let go some of the reliance on their own rational mind and recognize that some experiences are not logically or easily understood at all. The move here is from either or to both and thinking. Complexity and paradox are embraced. People in this stage are more willing to dialogue with people of other faiths, seeking further information and correction to their own beliefs. And they're able to do this without letting go of their own faith. The last stage Fowler described was the universalizing stage. Very few people reach this stage, he says, which is characterized by seeing all humanity as one brotherhood and taking profound, self-sacrificing action to care for all humanity because of this view. Now, philosopher Ken Wilber describes another stage beyond this, one which he calls integral spirituality. Now, I don't pretend to understand the full scope of this one, but Wilber says it goes beyond universalizing and exists when the person feels a oneness with an all-pervading presence. All of life is seen as an integrated whole. This he calls waking up spiritually, and all the stages before this are growing up spiritually. Both are necessary to achieve full spiritual development, according to Wilber. Now, as I said before, very few people get to the universalizing and integral stages. And some philosophers argue that it is not a straight line of development. People may move backward from time to time before moving forward. And a small handful of people who practice any of those religions characterized by the earlier stages I described may in fact achieve higher or even the highest level of development within that religion. Now, where did these descriptions most resonate with your spiritual development and how you see it today? Now, Gary reminded us at the beginning of his reflection of the full text of the definition of pluralism. We celebrate that we are all sacred beings, diverse in culture, experience, and theology. We covenant to learn from one another in our free and responsible search for truth and meaning. We embrace our differences and commonalities with love, curiosity, and respect. Now, this definition includes both the value we hold and the covenant, the promise we make to ourselves and each other to actively search for truth and meaning in our lives. Now, the stages I described earlier, especially the later ones, don't just happen. They are nearly always the result of active seeking on the part of the person craving a deeper connection. Now, my spiritual journey was a bit different from Gary's. I grew up in a liberal Presbyterian faith, attending Sunday school religiously from the time I was 6 until I went off to college. But by the time I was around 11 years old, I realized I didn't really believe in the God I had been learning about, even from my Sunday school teacher who scientifically explained every miracle. For the next 6 to 7 years, I really tried to believe. Now, you can imagine what it was like. A teenager growing up in small town South Carolina, wanting desperately to feel what my peers felt and professed. But I just couldn't sustain it. When I went off to college, and incidentally broke up with the son of a Baptist minister that I had dated for about a year, I realized I couldn't pretend anymore. I didn't believe God existed, and I was comfortable with that disbelief. At that point, I stopped my spiritual journey. I was at the deconstructive stage, and I stayed there for about 25 years because I didn't feel I needed to go any further. Gradually, though, I became more and more aware of my sense of being part of something bigger than my own little godless world. And I often credit Carl Sagan's Cosmos series with rebooting my spiritual exploration. I still felt no connection to God, but rather to the cosmos. That feeling is what made me take my first step into Unitarian Universalism. I found the First UU Church of St. Louis in 1987 and joined almost immediately. But honestly, most of my seeking at that time was looking for affirmation of what I already believed. I wasn't actively exploring spirituality. I'm not sure when I became open to really seeking truth and meaning, but I know it has happened in worship committee meetings, when I listen to Chelsea Henry talk about pagan practices, or Gary with his reflections, or when I feel the beauty and meaning of a song we're singing, or when I hear our youth and young adults speak UU values when they voice their concerns for the world, or when I participate in widening the circle sessions, or when I learn lessons of love and humility from so many of you in day-to-day life in this congregation. I know I'm not the same person spiritually that I was in 1987, and I hope I won't be the same person when I depart this earth. But enough about me. When I described the stages of spiritual development earlier, I used Fowler's chronological ages as the markers. But how does that apply to people who come into our UU congregations as adults, as most of our members do? Well, UU religious educators have identified similar stages of spiritual development in members at whatever chronological age they come here. And they have developed curricula designed to meet the needs of folks at those different stages. We said that for the newborn baby, it's all about building trust. Well, this is a large piece of the first step for a new UU member, too. Can they trust this community? Can they trust what they're learning about the faith? Engaging with people in the congregation and learning the basics of Unitarian Universalism are critical pieces for this new member. From there, it goes to building the foundations for faith development. Early on, new members need to hear our stories, our myths, if you will, of our beginnings and foundations. That leads to community building, in which the member actively contributes to the life and well-being of the congregation, and to exploring more spiritual opportunities and variety. Members may also enter a deconstructive stage, struggling with what they have learned about this faith and its history, or with their own religious past and its impact on them. Some may leave the church at this point. If they stay with it, members may grow into the next stage called Building Unitarian Universalism. At this point, the person is comfortable exploring all the different aspects of Unitarian Universalism. The last stage is building the world we dream about. Now, this parallels the universal stage that Fowler described. This stage may appear in the long-term member, but like the universal stage, is much rarer than the earlier ones. Well, there they are. Like Fowler's stages, there is not necessarily a straight line progression from one to the other. The search for truth and meaning doesn't come easily, and it isn't a passive pastime. We have promised to help one another in our respective searches. We recognize that we have started at different places, and we progress through them at different rates. We listen to each other, we teach one another, we love one another. The point is, we don't, most of us can't do it alone. And if you're interested in learning more about what kinds of resources are available or how you might help, talk to Marguerite or me. Don't stop searching. I would guess that even those rare people who reach the integral stage of spiritual wisdom are still looking and learning. May your search bring you joy, and may you continue to find new expressions of truth and meaning in your life. Blessed be, and amen.